Well, it looks like Israel's set to make coronavirus history again by offering a fourth COVID-19 vaccine shot for locals over the age of 60, along with some at-risk groups and medical personnel as well. Now, this comes as the country has recorded the first Omicron death, and hundreds of new cases of the variant have been confirmed in Israel. In response to the new strain, the Israeli government has blocked nearly all foreign visitors. They've tightened restrictions across the country as well. And Israel is not alone in taking these measures. The rest of the world is similarly bunkering down to stem the spread of the Omicron, and it looks like the world economy is set to deal with another major blow. According to Bloomberg, the global economy is expanding by just 0.7% in the final 3 months of the year. That is half the pace of the previous quarter. So the question now is, what does Omicron mean long-term for business? Well, joining us to break this down is Professor Avi Weiss. He's a president of the Taub Center for Social Policy Studies in Israel. So how has the Omicron variant most visibly impacted the Israeli economy so far? Let's start off with Israel.
Well, first of all, let me say hi, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here. So starting with Israel, not that much yet. It's just too early to really talk about anything significant. Of course, there has been the effect of what you spoke about, the shutdown of airspace. Once again, that could clearly affect things like tourism. I'm more worried about the incoming traffic than the outgoing traffic. Israelis will not be able to travel as much as they were, but also people will not be able to come in. And that could have an effect on certain industries. But to say they would have an overall large effect on the economy is pushing it a little bit far.
Well, what about the world economy as a whole? Because we have been seeing an impact in the stock market. I mean, there are certain industries that are certainly already being impacted by this fifth wave of coronavirus.
Oh, yes. There's no question that there is some amount of effect on certain industries. It's not very large. It's not very widespread. There are concerns about what's going to happen to prices and things along those lines. But for the most part, we're not really talking about anything that is huge, or at least it doesn't look like it. And this is very different than what we've had in the past. I mean, people are going to naturally compare what's going on now with what happened, let's say, last March and April. It's not really the same because of a number of different things, including the fact that we do have vaccines now, and we know how to deal with the illness a lot better than we did in the past. And because of the fact that we've learned how to operate alongside COVID a lot better than we obviously knew then, when we absolutely knew nothing.
Is Omicron worsening inflation?
So that's a good question. It has the potential to, and it will depend on what governments do. Specifically, any of us who studied economics, one of the things they learned is that increases in money could increase prices, and that's basically a basic known in an intro macro course. And what's happened is that in the first wave, we saw the country pouring a lot of money into the economy, assisting all the different parties that needed assistance. You had some type of increase in prices. It wasn't very, very large, but there was an increase in prices. And we know that inflation in the U.S., for instance, or price increase in the U.S. this year was at about 7%. So now you need to ask yourself, what would happen if the Omicron gets much more widespread? In particular, what's going to be important is what happens to the health systems, whether they're able to cope with it or not. And if you get to a point where you need to start shutting things down, how much money will the government pour into the economy? If there's a lot, that could lead to some level of inflation. If there isn't, then it probably will not happen.
So, I guess a question now is, what does Omicron mean for global economic recovery from the pandemic as a whole? Because obviously we saw ourselves going on somewhat of a positive trajectory that now seems to kind of be stopping in its tracks.
Well, it's not even just a positive trajectory. We had recovered everything that was lost, basically. In other words, the level of production, the GDP, or GDP per capita, whatever you want to use, returned in the second quarter of this year back to where it was before this all started. That was much faster than what was expected. A slowdown after that is not surprising because you basically recovered to where you were, and you're returning to some type of more sustainable type of level of growth. So therefore, a downturn in that is not a very, very surprising finding. It will still be faster than it was, obviously in 2020, but even slightly before that. but still, you don't expect any kind of huge effect. Now, again, it goes back to the same questions. If we see a huge cost on the health system, if we see hospitals, falling apart because they can't take the number of people that are coming in, then you're going to end up having some type of additional restrictions placed on the economy. And when that happens, well, all those same people who were harmed in the past, or all those same industries that were harmed in the past, would be harmed once again. So therefore, what's going to happen depends on just how bad this really gets. And in particular, what we don't know at all yet is just how many people are going to be hospitalized as a result of it. So we do know that there's been that it is very infectious, but we don't know how extreme it is. And that's information we have to get. And part of the reason, by the way, we don't know how extreme it is because of the vaccines. We are able to, of course, be in much better shape than we were a year ago.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, if we see continuing restrictions like this, especially when it comes to travel, you name it, this isn't looking very good. I'd like to thank you for joining us, Avi, with that update.